Good day everyone. Let us begin with the experiment as a data collection method. An experiment is a highly controlled research method where the researcher manipulates one or more variables to observe their effect on another variable. The purpose is to establish cause and effect relationship. For example, a psychologist might change the level of background music in a study room to see if it affects students' concentration. The strength of experiment lies in their control. Researcher can isolate variables and minimize external influences, which increases the reliability of the result. In many cases, experiments are conducted in laboratories, but they can also be done in the field setting, such as schools or workplaces. However, the experiments also have limitations. They may lack realism because conditions are often artificial. Ethical concerns can also raise, especially when participants are exposed to treatments that could influence their behavior in ways they did not anticipate. In short, experiments are a powerful way to test hypotheses and identify causal relationships, but they must balance control with ethical and practical considerations. Next, let's look at the survey method, which is one of the most widely used tools in social research. Surveys allows researchers to collect large amounts of data from many respondents quickly and efficiently. Surveys can be carried out using questionnaires or interviews. Questionnaires are a written set of questions that participants complete on their own, either on paper or online. They are cost-effective and allow for anonymity, which can encourage honest responses. Interviews, on the other hand, involves a researcher asking questions directly. This can be structured with set of questions and limited answers, or unstructured where the conversation flows more naturally. Interviews provide depth and flexibility, allowing researchers to probe further into responses. The strength of surveys lies in their versatility. They can measure attitudes, behavior, or opinions across large population. However, they depend heavily on the design of the questions. Poorly worded questions can lead to the bias or unreliable answers. In short, surveys, whether through questionnaire or interview, are essential for gathering data on people's perspective and behavior. Now, let us consider secondary data analysis, which involves using data that has already been collected by others. These might include census data, organizational records, historical archives, or datasets from previous studies. The advantage of secondary data is that it saves time and resources. For example, a researcher studying employment patterns may use government labor statistics instead of conducting their own survey. This method also allows researchers to study trends over time using existing databases. However, the limitation is that researchers have less control over how the data was originally collected. The definitions, measurements, or sample may not perfectly fit the new study's needs. Despite these limitations, secondary data analysis is extremely valuable, especially in large-scale or longitudinal studies where primary data collection could be too costly or impractical. Now, let's discuss observation as a method of collecting data. Observation involves systematically watching and recording behavior or events as they occur naturally. There are two main types: participant observation, where the researcher becomes part of the group being studied, and non-participant observation, where the researcher remains an outsider. For example, a researcher studying classroom dynamics might either sit quietly at the back or actively engage with the students. Observation provides rich real-world data and is particularly useful in understanding social interaction, body language, and context. However, it can be time-consuming and subjective, since the researcher interpretation plays a major role here. In short, observation captures behavior as it unfolds, offering insights that surveys or experiments might miss. Let's move to the focus group. which involves guided discussion with small group of participants, usually 6 to 12 people. A moderator facilitates the conversation to explore people's opinion, attitude, and experiences on a given topic. Focus groups are powerful because they capture not only individual view but also group dynamics, how people agree, disagree, or build on each other's ideas. For example, a company might use a focus group to understand consumer reaction to a new product design. The main limitation is that group discussion can be influenced by dominant voices and participants may hesitate to share sensitive views in a group setting. In short, focus groups provide interactive and in-depth insight, making them valuable tools for exploring perception and ideas. Now let us examine the case study method. A case study is an in-depth investigation of a single case, such as an individual, organization, event, or community. The strength of case studies is their ability to capture rich, detailed insight into complex phenomena. For example, a researcher might study how one school successfully implemented an online learning program, providing lessons for others. Case studies are particularly valuable when exploring new or rare situations. However, their limitation is that findings from one case may not be generalizable to broader population. In summary, case studies offer depth and context, making them ideal for understanding unique situations in detail. Next, let us explore ethnography. Sorry, I just start from here. Ethnography, right? Okay. Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
Action.
Next, let us explore the ethnography, which comes from ethnoanthropology. Ethnographic research involves immersing oneself in the daily life of a community to understand its culture, practice, and beliefs. Ethnographers often spend long periods living among participants, observing and interacting with them. For example, an ethnographer studying rural farmers might live in the village to experience their routine firsthand. The strength of ethnography lies in its holistic and deep perspective on human behavior in natural settings. However, it is time-intensive and requires researchers to manage their own biases while building trust with the participant. In short, ethnography allows us to see the world through the eyes of those we study, capturing culture in its natural context. Now, let us discuss grounded theory, a qualitative method focused on building theory directly from the data. Unlike studies that begin with a hypothesis, grounded theory starts with the data collection and then identifies patterns and concepts that emerge. For example, a researcher interviewing healthcare workers might find recurring themes about the burnout and support system. These insights are then developed into a new theory about workplace well-being. Grounded theory is powerful because it is data-driven, flexible, and well-suited for exploring new or under-researched areas. Its limitation is that it requires careful, iterative analysis and it can be time-consuming. In short, ground theory helps generate new theories that are deeply connected to real-world evidence. Finally, let us consider action research, which is collaborative and problem-solving approach. In action research, researchers work together with participants to identify a problem, take action to address it, and then study the outcomes. For example, teachers might partner with the researcher to test new classroom strategies, evaluate their effectiveness, and make adjustments. The process is cyclical: act, observe, and reflect. The strength of action research is its practical relevance. It not only produces knowledge but also leads to real improvement in practice. However, it can be challenging to balance rigorous research with the practical demand of action. In short, action research bridges the gap between theory and practice, making it a powerful tool for change and improvement.